Hi, I'm Tim from the podcast of The Urban Mystic. In this second episode of the series on the problem of God, I want to highlight a very important challenge that comes from the gap between faith and experience, the gap between what we believe in and what we experience, and the discrepancy between those. When we think about it, we can think of there being an axis, and on the one axis, we have the faith axis, as in how strong are your beliefs, how strong is your faith. And then on the other axis, we can have our experience. And our experience in this sense is broad, even as the language of faith is broad. Because in the context of faith, we're talking about religion, we're talking about what people are supposed to believe, we're talking about what they're raised to believe in. And very often, when I speak to people, they really reflect to me that they were raised to believe in these things that actually isn't part of the experience. They were raised to believe in a God they don't experience. They were raised to believe in these concepts that they've never experienced in their daily life, or where there's a discrepancy, that the God that they were raised in or what they were raised to believe in doesn't seem to match up with the experience in their everyday life. And so the language is always people need to stay within the fold of the religion, stay within the fold of the community, because that's what supports your faith. And then people feel that if they're just going about living their lives, there's actually nothing to support their faith. There's nothing to keep that going. There's nothing to prop it up. There's nothing to keep that established. And so in this context, there's a difference between the two. So if we think about it, on one hand, people often have they're very low in experience, but they're very high on faith. And that's often the case in the beginning, where people are raised to believe in a God that they don't necessarily experience. And hence, we've got to question what is their experience? What is their experience about? Now, when I run the 7 key relationships with people, either one-on-one or in groups, one of the things that very much emerges towards the end, because the conversation about our relationship with God does only come at the end. But the thing that really emerges at the end for many people is that their relationship has been with an idea of God, their relationship has been with religion, their relationship has been with institutional structures, their relationship has been with these things that they're supposed to believe in, that they're supposed to have faith in. And yet their experience is not with God. Their experience is with an intermediary, the intermediary of religion, the intermediary of family, the intermediary of church services, the intermediary of their beliefs. So if anything, they've got a relationship with their beliefs, they've got a relationship with their faith, the experiences of their faith, the experiences of the institution of faith, the experience is not necessarily of God. As people's experience grows in that direction, so too often does their faith decrease in that direction. And that ends up being a very, very profound thing, because it's very more important, I feel, that people's faith and their experience match than they remain in a dysfunctional relationship with faith that actually gets in the way of life or distorts their experience of life and distorts their relationships. I think that this is one of the biggest problems when it comes to the problem of God and the meaning and meaningful spirituality, what to do about finding God and experiencing God. Because really the question comes down to are you experiencing the God that you believe in? Are you experiencing what it is that you claim to be believing in? And to what extent does your experience match that? So for many people, their faith, whichever faith they have, rests on a very small sliver of experience. So one of my big critiques about modern spirituality across the board that we experience in our society, in our broad, diverse Western society, is that wherever you go, religions are often doing the same thing. You're arriving at a service, there's some form of singing, chanting, dance components, some form of celebratory component in that, participatory group practice. And that's often followed by someone doing a reading and a teaching. And you'll see that whether you go to the Hare Krishnas, whether you go to a Buddhist temple, whether you go to a mosque, whether you go to a church, all of these end up being the same. So modern religion finds the same expression there. You've got some form of religious representative, a priest, a imam, a monk, or whatever, representing in that context. And they are a little bit ahead. Often they've had a few more experiences, and they've got a lot of experience working with people, and they've got a lot of experience working with their faith and interpreting their faith and interpreting it for a world. And so they end up being in this middle ground, plugging the questions, plugging the gaps for people. And the religion ends up doing that. But the question that I have, and what I've always wondered at and what I've always looked at is to what extent does the faith enable people to actually experience God? And to what extent does the experience enable a confirmation of the faith? And it's very difficult when you actually get into it to answer that for people. It's very hard for people to answer that for themselves, and yet it's a very important discussion, a very important thing that people need to process. And so as I look at this and as I chew through it, I feel that this ends up being incredibly relevant. It's incredibly relevant because we've got to find ways in which to grow in a very different perspective. And that's along this axis here. As we grow in experience, so do we grow in our beliefs. And our beliefs are growing in proportion to our experience, rather than being a disproportional relationship between the two. And in this overlap, you often find a big difference between those on this side that are deconstructing and those that on this side that are reconstructing. Those that are on this side that are experiencing the loss of God and the absence of God, and those that are on this side that are experiencing the return of God and the presence of God. And I tend to work with both and have conversations with people that fit into both camps. It's vital and valuable work that is really adding a lot of meaning to people's lives. So would absolutely love you to like and subscribe and to follow the links below and support the work of the Urban Mystic in continuing this. But then also, most importantly, these are the kind of conversations that myself, my co-host, and others are really wanting to have with people. And if you find yourself in the position of wanting to explore this kind of thing and have conversations with us, then we're here and we're available and we're keen to explore this. So when it comes to this, the question really is how do we go about entering into the experience of life? How do we go about entering into this world that we're in, and how do we go about finding and experiencing God? How do we go about finding and experiencing the divine? Not necessarily according to a predefined construct. Is it more important that we hold on to the belief of God, or is it more important that we let the belief of God go and encounter and build a relationship with the God who is? Is it more important that we hold on to these statements of belief about what we think about God, or is it more important that we risk that? Risk those statements, risk those beliefs in order to engage the God who is. Meister Eckhart many years ago had this statement, this prayer, the prayer of God, rid me of God. That prayer really rings true for mystics today as well. People like myself, people like you and others. That for people like us, what we wish to do is be rid of the idea of God that potentially gets in the way of us actually experiencing God. Because if we hold to a particular idea of God, we might not like what we experience, but we also don't let ourselves encounter God as a stranger. We often start off with the idea that we already know God because we are raised in a particular belief system. We're raised within a particular religion. That's often the case for Christians. People are raised to have faith in God, and how do you experience God? It's in and through doing church. It's in and through the community. It's in and through reading your Bible. But when you analyze and you look at the relational transactions between those, it's actually an internal relationship. People are building an idea of God. They're internalizing an idea of God that exists out there in Scripture and exists out there in the institution of faith. So there's this institutionalized idea, this long-standing idea of God that's a part of the faith. And what happens is we internalize that idea. And our relationship ends up being with that idea of God. And yet we struggle to answer questions about how to experience God. We struggle to answer questions about what intimacy with God means. We struggle to answer questions about what it means to walk with God or what it means to hear from God. And so the clearest example of that is you take people who, for instance, have got a lot of experience in life and they've held to these beliefs at the top here all along. And you start talking about experiencing God or wanting to hear from God. And the immediate answer is, how will you know that you're experiencing God? And I can guarantee you, if someone has been a Christian for 20 years and they're asking that as a question, they're asking it out of the foundation of not having heard from God enough to be able to rely on that relationship. We often end up talking about Christianity as a relationship with God, but what we have is a relationship to faith. We've got a relationship to Christianity. We've got a relationship to these beliefs. We don't actually have a relationship with a God who draws near in person to speak and act. And that's really what we're highlighting. If that's the kind of conversation you want to continue, and if that's the kind of thing you want to explore a bit more, and you want to explore it with us, then I want to invite you to like and subscribe to this channel. And I want to invite you to engage us and have a conversation with us. You can find a form on our website. There's a link in the episode notes that you can follow. On the other hand, I also feel that this is one of the most vital offerings in terms of spirituality. If we consider devotional spirituality, we consider the wisdom tradition, they're relationships that people have with themselves and relationships that people have with faith. And on that basis, we say we've got a relationship with God. What we're carving out is a very different relational spirituality that puts the engagement with God as a person front and central. It's not working against any of those spiritualities or anything that comes before, and it's not introducing anything new that actually isn't part of our faith, going back to its primal foundations, and even before that to the God who created everything. Yet what we're doing is we're drawing this out. So I don't think that there's any more vital work to be doing than to be doing this. I want to invite you to support the Urban Mystic, to consider supporting this as a missional venture where we're carving out a new approach to spirituality. Where we're putting into words an approach to spirituality that's existed throughout history. I don't think that there's anything more vital than this, and I really would love your support for this.